Hello, and welcome to FI for Kids, the podcast about guiding your kids on the path to financial independence and extraordinary lives. I'm your host, Dominic Delacqua. Our guests today are Spencer and Brenley Burton. Spencer has degrees in economics, law, and a master's in public administration, and is the president and COO of the Ensign Group, one of the largest healthcare organizations in the U.S. in the post-acute care setting. Brenley holds a degree in communications and a master's in public administration, and is on the board and management team of Humble Village, a nonprofit organization that works with children's and mothers' nutrition in Guatemala. Our conversation today, however, is about their other extremely important work, raising their 7 kids between the ages of 4 and 18. Welcome, Brenley and Spencer, and thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thanks, Dom.
So let's start with you just telling us a little bit about your background. So how you guys came together, what your lives were like before, and in particular, what you learned about money when you were growing up.
Sounds great. Do you want to get started?
Sure. Okay. So I grew up in a large family. I'm the sixth of 14 kids, actually. And I feel like I definitely learned as a child the importance of money. And my parents were really good about teaching us about budgeting and saving and doing good with the money that we earned. And I had a lot of jobs growing up, put myself through college, and as far as education, Spencer and I met at Brigham Young University, and I did my undergrad there and then also master's over.
Yeah, something about Brenley she didn't mention is so not only did they have 14 kids, but they were in Eugene, Oregon, which is really interesting place, period. But when you have 14 kids in a giant van that you're driving around town, it's really unique. And so they were a bit of a standout in town. One of the things I loved learning when I met Brenley is all of her family members had these jobs, whether it was, and maybe you can share a little bit about some of your jobs, but all the boys had paper routes. They'd get up at 5 a.m, bundle their papers, and they'd deliver the papers around their neighborhood. Brenley, you did taught music lessons and stuff, didn't you?
Yeah, so I have a background in piano, and so I taught actually piano lessons from the time that I was in 8th grade through high school, and that was my main source of income. And we would pick berries in the summer at the local berry farms and things like
that. Yeah,
cool.
Yeah.
And one of the great jobs Brenley had too is she babysat a lot, which has been, really awesome that she has that, that skill, because we need it. all 8 of us need it sometimes. My background was maybe a little less unique. I grew up in a small town in Utah called Huntsville, and I was one of 6 kids. I was the second, and I was the oldest boy. And my dad was an attorney, and my mom was an RN who, once we went back to, started having kids, she raised us and then went back to work later on. But as the oldest boy, I think learning to work for me was we had a small farm. It grew over time, but it was about 25 acres. And so summer was always fun because we had hay to haul and we had some of the farm things to do. Again, not heavy farm work, but enough that we learned the value of, there was easy ways to make $1, and then there was harder ways to make $1. And we were doing the harder ways in the summer with alfalfa and things. Yeah. And then the other thing that was great was we had a yard and a home that my parents built where there wasn't a yard, and it was kind of starting from scratch. So one of the things that I think was really formative for me was, while my dad's a bit of a micromanager as far as liking things done perfectly, he's a perfectionist. Really, it's a strength, and can be a challenge sometimes having that perfectionism. But he, probably at great cost to himself, gave me the ability sometimes to do projects where I got to have ownership. I remember at one stage we had the irrigation canal that fed the alfalfa. It was just flood irrigation, but as we expanded our yard, the irrigation ditch went through our yard, and he gave me the chance to do the project of turning this irrigation canal into a beautiful babbling spring that went over rocks and was landscaped and went into a pond. So one summer I spent, hundreds of hours digging this out with his backhoe and then lining it with rocks and designing it. And it was really thrilling for me. And when I go back to his house, I still love seeing that stream that I was able to build. It was really hard, I had my brothers that would help me, and I got paid for some of it. But I think there is something really powerful about learning the value of taking ownership for a project that's not just, when you're being micromanaged and someone's saying, all right, clean your room, but rather getting to have a broader picture where you get to create something and, reap the rewards of your labor.
Yeah, you get the satisfaction of having accomplished this thing that not only you can enjoy, but that other people, I mean, and you still go back, you're still able to enjoy it. So that's actually really cool. I'm a little envious of that. Like that makes me want to go there and see it, Spencer. I think that's great. How
Well,
old
you
were
got
you
an
when you did
invitation, Tom.
that? Sorry, go
So
ahead.
that I was probably mid-teens, maybe
Yeah.
16 years old. So I was capable enough to drive a little backhoe and things like that, capable enough to not get hurt, which, yeah, obviously I think we've tried to apply that too, and we could tell a little bit more about that as we talk about our kids. But I think it has to be age appropriate, but stretching is not bad for kids.
Yeah.
It's
No,
not bad for
I
any
think
of us,
it's,
honestly.
sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying it's not bad for any of us, right? Even us as adults.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think it's actually good for us. Yeah. I think and especially for kids, I think it's really important because that's one of the ways I think that they learn, oh, I'm capable of doing more than I thought I was, right? I think there's a huge amount of value in that for sure.
Yeah.
Um, so before I follow up with you, Spencer, I want to back up just a second, Brenley. So I have two questions. One, since you grew up in Eugene, are you a Ducks fan? Do you follow the Ducks at all, or?
A little bit. My dad and brothers for sure are, and here and there I follow as well.
Yeah, yeah. No, my wife went to the U of O. She's from
Oh,
Oregon,
is that
so
right?
she's a Ducks fan.
Oh, that's
She's
great.
a former Duck. So, um, and the other question was, so you talked about learning about saving and budgeting and stuff from your parents. Was that
Mhm.
something that they specifically made a point to teach you kids, or was it something that you just picked up on from observation, or a little bit of both?
Well, for sure, my parents were good examples of it, but my dad's an accountant and he was very precise and really thought it was important to teach us those skills. And so we had charts that we'd go over every Sunday with them.
Oh,
And it
wow. Great.
had like our earnings, and then it had how much we were supposed to save and how much we were supposed to share, give to our tithing for our church, and then the money that we could spend and things. So, yeah, it was pretty laid out, and we were able to get excited about, you know, looking at our savings account and how that was growing, and then also being excited about how much we could spend and things like that.
Yeah, yeah, cool. So Spencer, what did you learn? So you talked about the value of kind of learning to take on tasks and sort of get a little bit beyond sort of the micromanagement and the satisfaction of a larger project and creating something. What did you learn about money when you were growing up? And what, again, it's kind of like with Brenley, was it something that was talked about in your house, or was it more observational?
That's a great question. But I think there's a little of both. We didn't talk a lot about money in my family. Brenley's family, with 14 kids and, a single income earner, that was, I imagine, pretty tight. My family, we weren't, extravagantly wealthy by any means, but we had, as I look back, we had plenty. So, there wasn't a lot of necessarily scarcity, but I do remember, when we go back to school shopping, we didn't have to buy our own clothes, which is something we've actually changed with our kids. But I remember our parents would give us an annual budget. So of our clothing shopping for back to school and throughout the year. So it was something that, was a couple $100 or, when I was in junior high and high school, there were these brands. You probably can relate to this, most parents, that there are these brands that were way too expensive because of the brand or the label they had on them.
Hmm.
And everybody wanted them and they were cool. And I remember thinking, okay, I could get like two pairs of pants for my entire budget for the year, or I could buy like six pairs of pants and a couple of shirts, if I got the more, regular brands. So I remember learning, the sacrifice there. It's not a big sacrifice, but just understanding that there were trade-offs. And you learn that when you do have a budget.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's actually a really great way for you guys to learn that. Now, with your siblings, did they take that same approach, or did it vary?
Yeah, not always. So I had some siblings that were more into the, high fashion.
Hmm.
They lived the more lavish lifestyle, and it was, it was fine. We got to make those decisions for ourselves. But for me, I think I just learned that a lot of frivolous stuff doesn't really matter. And even though I kind of longed for those things, I think it's okay to not get everything you want.
Yeah.
And especially if I think if your parents that can give your kids everything that maybe they would want, I think having some restraint, at least for Brenley and me, having some restraint is something we really focus on because there's so many lessons you learn about scarcity, basic economics,
Yeah.
that you don't learn if you're just given everything that you want. And you may be happy in the short run, but I think you miss out in the long run.
Well, and you learn that incredibly important sense of value, what not just the value of money and how to spend it and valuation, which is a somewhat different thing, right? But also it helps to start with kids, them learning, well, what do they value, right? Like you didn't value, I mean, every kid when you're at that age, some part of you like, oh, well, you want kind of the fashionable stuff, but ultimately you decided, nah, I don't want it that much, right? You valued other things more. And right, as kids or as any of us are pursuing financial independence, that ability to sort of know what it is that you value and what things in life bring you meaning and joy is essential. Because again, even as adults, the vast majority of us can't have everything. And so there are always choices that have to be made. And so knowing where you want to spend your money then helps you make the choices of, okay, you know what, I'm going to go without those things. They don't matter to me that much because I want to make sure I have enough to save so that I can invest it and make that grow for me so that I can move myself closer to financial independence. So I think, right, then there are lots of ways to try to teach that sort of stuff to kids, but any way that you're trying to get at that, I think those become really valuable and important lessons for them that are hopefully lifelong.
Yeah, I think that's right, Dom. And maybe just one other thing to share that might be interesting. I think it is a little bit unique. Growing up, my parents really taught, they had paid for their home with cash. They were fortunate to have an investment mature. My mom's dad passed away and he passed on some money to them. So they were able to, buy a house without taking a loan, which I know is really unique back then and certainly
Hmm.
today with the housing prices where they are. But
Hmm.
they really instilled in us uh, that you just don't go into debt. And I know that's not possible for everyone, but it was something really unique they gave us. So when we were making college decisions later on, that was just ingrained in us the idea that you got to get a scholarship, you got to work a job part time, and you got to really manage your
Okay.
spending. And even in grad school. So we learned that if you want to stay out of debt when you're in college, first of all, you choose a reasonably priced institution, get a
Mm-hmm.
scholarship if you can, and then probably work a job and work a summer job. And
Yeah.
while that doesn't give you entire freedom, we still had fun in college. But that was something that I always carried with me and something that maybe I probably feel most grateful and proud of is that Brenley and I, when we got married, we were able to, we were later, we were both in grad school, but we were able to start our marriage out with no debt
Yeah,
and
that's great.
and continue with no debt through our time. We rented a long time, which maybe wasn't a smart thing. A lot of people wisely start building equity, but we were moving all around with my job,
Hmm.
and so we rented longer than probably most would until we had enough cash that we could buy a small house, and then from there we've always had money working on our side instead of debt working against us. And
Yeah.
so again, it's unique, but it's been a huge blessing. Parents taught us that.
Yeah. No, that's fantastic. So let's move on then to your kids and what has been your approach to teaching them about managing their money and then investing in any way if you've had any conversations with them about that? And also, and this frequently comes up, and this kind of is what I was getting at with one of the questions with you, Spencer. So, because it seems like just as kids have personalities that vary in all sorts of different ways, that also seems to vary with how they their relationship with money. So, just be curious to sort of hear whatever comes to mind as you're talking about what you're doing with them, just how their reactions have been just based on the different personalities that you've got in the house.
Yeah, absolutely. That's very evident with our children. We've seen that the variety of desire to save, to spend, right? There's all kinds. And we have a system in place, kind of like what I grew up with, where we encourage our children to save 50% of what they earn and then to pay tithing to our church and give to charity and things. And they're able to spend the rest and anything that they choose to save. And they'll watch those accounts that we've set up for them, their savings accounts. And sometimes they get competitive with their siblings, which has been fun to see. Some
That's
of the
cool.
siblings really want to beat their other sibling, especially if it's an older sibling, they want to have more money than them in their account.
That's great.
Our 4-year-old is on this last Saturday. We were out working in the yard, and I do pay our kids after they've done their one inside and outside chore on Saturdays. If they'll
Hmm.
work extra, I pay them, and they make as many dollars per hour as they are old. So my
Ah.
4-year-old, if he's working hard, he can get $4 an hour. My 6-year-old, my 8-year-old gets 8. They're excited for their birthdays because they get a raise every birthday. And but my
Sure.
4-year-old, after working, he told dad to show him that he has $163.60 in his bank account,
Cool.
which is not much, but for a 4-year-old, he's proud of that. And he
Yeah.
asks me, every week where he is, which is obviously we don't want him to be obsessed with money, but it's cool that he understands that his work, relates to this account getting bigger.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And
So,
one other thing, Brenley said we double it. The way it works when we double, so let's say, we have them keep track of their work on a little card. It's like a time card, and every couple of weeks they can cash in their card. And let's say, so I'll give the example of my 14-year-old who's one that does love earning money and is very entrepreneurial, does all sorts of activities on his own to try and make money. It's just he just loves it, and he actually loves spending money too,
mhm,
because he has it. But
mhm,
anyway, so let's say he works and he's got $200 on kind of a pay period. So he would take that $200 and we'd sit down. We'd give 50% to his savings. He'd do 40% that I would cash out with actual cash,
mhm,
uh, from our little money box, and then 10% would go to his donations, charitable donations for tithing.
mhm.
And so that in that case, $100 would be his for savings. So when we put that into his online savings account, Brenley and I double it. So we would actually do $200. So
Oh,
for
so you're doing
every,
a match.
we match
Yeah, that's
everything he
great.
puts into savings.
Hmm.
And, that's probably more generous than some, but we feel like we'd rather have them have more money in their savings that they feel like they earned versus other ways that they could do it. And we do have our kids pay for more stuff with their spending. We don't match their spending, it's just the 40%, but
Hmm.
we actually have them do things like buy their clothes, pay for gas in their cars, things like that,
Yeah,
because if they're working they should have enough money to do it, and we want them
yeah.
to be working.
So now, just to clarify, so it's if I understood you right, so they've got a couple of, so each one has a couple of chores that they do that they don't get paid for. Did I understand you right? That's just part of being part of the family.
Absolutely. Yeah. They have, chores every day. And then Saturdays are kind of the day where we do a lot of work around the house. So they
Hmm.
have to do a job inside and then a job outside that takes them,
Okay.
quite a while. And then anything beyond that they want to do extra, they can earn money for.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, great. Okay, cool. And the 50%, right? So you're kind of 50-40-10 deal. That's what we do. There's some other people that have done that do some similar things. Sort of a give, save, spend, right? So that's sort of what you're doing, right? But I love and that's what we do, right? With the 50% that has to go into savings, because it's just creating that habit is our hope, right? Early on, that if you get used to living on 50% of what you make, that lets you set that other part aside. And like I said before, then as you get older, right, you can start to invest that and then really sort of watch that grow, take advantage of compound interest, all that sort of thing. And that's how you can, you know, if you achieve financial independence much sooner than a traditional retirement age, which doesn't mean you have to retire. If you love your job and you want to keep working, you can. If it's that you want to keep doing things, but you want to maybe move in a different direction that maybe doesn't pay as well, but then you have that opportunity. The whole point is if you can get to that point at a younger age, it just opens up a world of possibilities for you. So, but you've got to have that high savings rate so then you can invest that to make that grow. So that's great that you've started that habit with them. I love that.
I think they enjoy it too. It's hard to give up 50%, but they do enjoy seeing that they're independent. And our girl who's in college, she's actually started burning into some of her savings. We've allowed that for education. That's one of the purposes
Oh,
we're good
mhm.
with. She got a scholarship, and she has a part-time job, but she has cut into that a little bit. But I think she takes some pride and is more frugal because she knows she's spending actual money
Yeah.
versus someone else's money, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. Sure. Yep. Yeah. Well, right, because it's easy if it's coming from just from the parents, like you can appreciate that, but it's still not really your money. And if it's coming from loans, you have to pay that back at some point, but that's a thing at 18, 19 that seems so far off that again, it doesn't seem real in the same way as this is her money that she earned over time, that she watched grow. And if she's dipping into that, that just has a different immediacy to it, I would think, than the other things, kind of like what you're saying. So that's cool.
One other thing, Dom, just I know we're jumping all around, but something that we're experiencing now for the first time is, most parents that get to be middle aged like we are, you probably have some sort of a financial counselor, or, whether it's your accountant or whether it's a financial planner type. But we, this last time had Eden, our oldest daughter, actually got on, and we had him spend a little time. He topped it to us. He didn't charge us, but he spent a half hour with her, and she really, I think, enjoyed getting to talk about her goals with a financial professional
Yeah.
without the parents being involved. I
Hmm.
think it made her feel very, mature and responsible for it. But I was happy about that. I was happy to have a competent person who I know understands our values with money be a third party that was kind of talking to her about her future. And so that's something I think will continue as our kids get a little older.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's great. And if you've been with that financial planner for a while, I'm sure you have gotten the sense that because the financial planners that I've talked to for the podcast, every one of them has mentioned that they got into it because they wanted to help people. So, I just think that's really cool. So yeah, that's great. Yeah, good. Um, so have you noticed, right, as you're let me ask this a different way. So you've got sort of certain routines and habits in place around money. Do you have much conversations with them about money? Like you're specifically trying to teach them things, or is it just conversations that come up as you're going through the habits and routines that you have in place? Because I've got a follow-up question to that I want to get to, so I'm going to start there.
Yeah, well, I'd say it kind of comes with just natural conversation, right? Where you're talking about working and money they can earn. Something that I think our kids have always, since a young age, have have led to conversations about money is when you're walking down the aisle of the store or something and they say, "Oh, I want to get that," right? And it just lends itself really well to a conversation about, okay, well, how do you think that you could earn the money to get that? Or, what could you do to make that a possibility if you really want that? And how much do you really want it? And let's talk about it. Something that we've done with our kids, it's one of the, I guess, systems that we've had for pretty much from the beginning of parenting is what we call mommy store. And it's a system where if the kids think they really want something, we'll purchase it for them and we'll put it into mommy store so that they don't get it immediately, but they
Oh,
can work
cool.
towards it and earn um, just we use the currency of the pom pom, the small little pom poms, and they each have their own jar, and they can earn those by doing their chores happily. They can earn them when we see them just doing something kind for another family member. Um, and so it's just a way for them to have an opportunity to earn something that is something that they really want. And we kind of can inflate the prices or
It's kind of a company store, if you,
Yeah.
you know what I mean. like we have, so if it's a new pair of socks or underwear or, a shirt for going back to school or a notebook for going back to school, those are very discounted.
Oh,
If it's
sure.
something like a toy, it's probably close to real price, if that makes sense. And
Yeah.
if it's something like candy that we're not crazy about them having, sometimes there's a little bit of inflation.
Yeah,
But
sure.
that was more when we had younger kids that we did that. But we still have some younger kids, and they still like that.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think, well, I love that concept. That's so cool because you're teaching them so many things. You're teaching them delayed gratification, right? You're teaching them the value of money, right? There's also some valuation of, well, how much does this, is this worth or is it not? And do I want to spend this, right? They've got to work to get it. And also, right, you're teaching them just some critical thinking, right? If they're in the store and you want this and you're like, you're not solving the problem, but you're like, well, okay, let's think about that. Like, how might you get that? Like, there's so many things that you've wrapped into one sort of simple thing that every kid does with every parent when you're walking through the store. That's really awesome. So kudos to you guy. That's a great strategy. So very cool.
Pretty well.
It's great, and yeah, I can use my pom poms in mommy's store and get things out of.
Nice. Um, so as you're talking with your kids or teaching them different lessons about money, have you noticed any lessons that you're trying to get across to them that don't seem to be sticking, that maybe later you see signs that they're starting to take root?
For sure. That's right.
Sure, we have one going on right now. We have a son who's a junior in high school. He has some just amazing strengths, and like every person, he's got some areas that he's working on to become an adult.
Hmm.
And one of the things that he's still struggling to learn is just the value of future money. And I'll give an example of that. We recently met with his counselor, and she gave him all sorts of opportunities to start signing up for applying for scholarships. Not huge scholarships, but $500 here and there. And these are the ones that are just kind of private scholarships.
Hmm.
And he hasn't been really interested in doing those. The same son is working part time at a pizza restaurant, making $12 an hour,
Hmm.
cooking pizzas. And so the other night we were talking about his scholarships, just checking in with him, and he's like, just really not interested. I'm not. He's a polite kid, so he was saying, "Sure, I'll do it," but we knew he was saying, "I'm never going to do that." And so we put into context. We said with taxes and with the way that things work with your savings and with what you give. Let's talk about how many hours you would have to work to have it equate to $1,000 scholarship when you go to college because he wants to go to college. And we worked out the math, and it was something like he would have to work his current job for an entire year to come up with that much, or
Hmm.
something like that. Because he's just working one or two shifts a week
Yeah.
at $11 an hour, $12 an hour, and after taxes and everything else, I think it got his attention where he could write a couple essays, spend 2 hours, and he could maybe get $1,000 to use for his school, which that's an enormous value that I think he was kind of overlooking
Yeah,
just
sure.
from his perspective he has right now. So that's
Yeah.
one example. We have an example of our younger son that's kind of funny too. Do you want to share that?
Sure. So we have a son who doesn't think as much about money, and he's roommates, with this son that we've talked about, the 14-year-old who is really into money, and he's pretty shrewd. They were at the store together, and our 10-year-old found these football gloves that he really wanted.
Hmm.
And he didn't have enough money to purchase them. And his older brother said, well, I'll give you a loan. And so the 10-year-old was so excited about these gloves. And he said, sure, okay, and he said, but you're going to have to pay interest. And
I was waiting for that.
yeah. So the 10-year-old was just like, sure, whatever, I'll do it. And, he ended up paying about how much in interest?
Probably 100%.
Oh my God.
So he,
Paid $50 for some $30 receiver gloves.
Yeah.
And then we
Mhm.
finally just said, look, there are usury laws. We got it short. But
Yeah.
but tell him how he's responded.
well, it's been interesting because that 10-year-old, a couple weeks ago, we were talking about something that he really wanted, and we were asking him how he planned to get it. And he said, well, I'm definitely not going to take out a loan from Everett. And so he's kind of learned that lesson of like going into debt is a bad idea. So, these are the types of things you want your kids to learn in natural ways like that, right?
Yeah,
Life lessons that
absolutely.
are super useful.
Yeah, that's great. That's good. Um, yeah, that makes me laugh. I could just, you talking about him before, and he just has an entrepreneurial mindset. I could see he was going to be wanting to charge him interest. He was too
Yeah,
eager to offer him the loan, right? That's
absolutely.
that's great, but a good lesson, for both of them. So that's cool. Um, okay. Any thoughts, or anecdotes come to mind about how your approach with the kids changes as they age? I mean, you've talked about some of that a little bit, but anything in particular stand out?
Yeah, one thing is we were just talking about how mommy's story is really effective till about age
10 to
10
12,
to 12.
probably.
The idea of, your 16-year-old getting pom-poms and turning them in for, something, it's just different, right?
Sure,
And
sure.
even some of the things that uh, a 14-year-old maybe will do a lot for to be able to buy a Lego set. That just changes. They mature, their interests change.
Yeah.
So I would say, um, but the principles I don't think change. The principles of trying to be frugal, the principles of trying to be responsible and proactive and think about the future, those things are the same, but probably they're more expansive.
Yeah.
And we are struggling with figuring out how to pivot entirely to teens. But what we are learning with teens is there are very immediate needs that what they see as needs. They can still be good avenues for teaching about money. For example, we don't make our kids buy a car. We live in kind of a rural area. The kids are about 20 miles away from the school they go to.
Oh,
And so um, they can ride a bus that takes an hour. And we have our 16-year-old rides the bus 3 days a week, but we let him drive a car twice a week to
hmm.
school if he wants to stay after. And we will give him a budget for that. We'll give him $10 a week. I know that's a little bit uh, frugal, but we give him $10 a week for gas, and then he gets to, if he wants to drive more. We did not want him to buy his own car. That was just a little bit too much for him. We felt like,
Hmm.
and we don't want. We live, like I said, you have to go over a mountain pass to get to school. So we did not want him driving a 1992 jalopy with bald tires over the mountain
Sure.
pass in the
Yeah.
winter. So we probably could be more strict on that, but we have a nice safe used car that he can drive, but he takes care of paying the gas. And if he wants to go more than those 2 times to school and back, he has to pay for the gas, and that's been really really interesting for him. He's doing things like his friends squill their tires because they think it's cool. His friends rev their engines and drive jeeps, and what he does is he tries to like turn off his car at stoplights so he doesn't waste gas. And he coasts, and it's really been cool to see
Yeah.
how when he's paying for his own gas, just how his behavior changes. And I think that's a good lesson to modify our behavior and pick and choose what we do based on the realities of finances.
Yeah, I think those are actually great lessons. And I really like the idea because this has come up in a couple of different ways, right? Where you're giving them a budget and then they've got to figure out how they want to spend that money over whatever period of time it is, which is also a super valuable lesson, right? That's very real world. So I think that's really cool that you're doing that. So very useful, I think. Um, okay. So as we wrap up, bigger picture question. What are your thoughts about what your hopes are for your kids in terms of their relationship with money, as they become adults?
Yeah, one thing I would just say is that kind of as a parenting philosophy in general, we really feel strongly that we don't want our kids to feel entitled, and I think, like we've talked about a little bit, it's easy when for example, with me, I think having grown up in a situation where I didn't have a lot of extra income, now that I could give my kids whatever they wanted, basically, it's tempting to just say, oh, that would be so nice to be able to just give them what you don't have. And in fact, I've
Mm.
seen this in, I work with some families, some immigrant families within our community, and I can see that a lot of them, as they're now in more comfortable circumstances than they grew up in. I think it's really tempting for them to not require that their kids do, any work or pay for anything, or, just trying to give them a more comfortable life than they probably grew up with.
Hmm.
And I think there is that danger of entitlement for this generation, right? Because we have so much more. So I think that's just kind of an overarching philosophy that we're trying to help our kids just really appreciate what it takes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really important. We want them to understand that work, even if it's not immediate, hard work generally associates with your ability to have the things that you want, whether that's leisure or whether that's material things. And so I think the lack of entitlement is part of it. The other thing, though, we want them to understand is, well, money is really, really essential to navigating life. We also want them to understand that it's not the end all be all. It doesn't make you happy, right? It allows you to do things that can bring happiness. It allows you to, provide comfort and also to be charitable and help other people, which honestly, our kids are learning through a lot of the things Brenley does. She's constantly having them go do, homeless shelters, or she took us international traveling. I was wanting to go to Hawaii. She took us to Guatemala to, the mountains to do some work with the nonprofit that she does. But all of those things I think show that yes, money is important. Money, in that Guatemala setting, was a life and death thing.
Yeah, sure.
Money allowed people to have the basic nutrition to raise their kids to adulthood versus have them actually die because where we were there's very very high malnutrition rate.
Yeah.
But money does not equate to happiness in the sense that we saw very happy people down there.
Yeah,
We
right.
saw people that were much happier than your average, probably American teenager, because they weren't
Hmm.
only focused on material things, they were focused on other things and on each other. So it's a hard balance, Dom, and we don't have it perfect. But I think two things are, we don't want them to feel entitled. We want them to respect what money can do and understand that work is associated with money, but also not worship money as if it's going to solve all your problems because it doesn't.
Right. Right. No, no, no. It can give you opportunity, and having financial security is nice, right? Because then again, it's less when you have less economic anxiety, again, that sort of opens things up, and then you can focus more on what really matters in life, which are, relationships and doing good things for other people and all those sorts of things that really sort of bring you sort of meaning and joy and value. But the money is just a tool for that. It's never an end in and of itself. So, yeah.
That's well said. I like that.
Yeah. No, I think that's really great what you guys are doing. I mean, and there's never, I mean, parenting is there are certain principles that seem to make sense and that sort of carry over, but it's always an art, right? You're dealing with different kids and their personalities are different and their ages are different, and you've got to make adjustments based on their personalities and also like we talked about as they age, things change, and so it's it's so dynamic, and so all we can do is the best that we can. But you guys, you're obviously giving it a lot of thought. I think you're really doing some really cool stuff. So, again, kudos to both of you.
Thanks. We're interested in learning more from your other guests on the podcast because you hit it right on the head. We don't know what we're doing. Parenting is extremely humbling experience, and you realize that the people that wrote the parenting books usually only had one kid because they are saying it's always a certain way, and every kid is different too.
Yeah.
And like you said, every era is different. But we're grateful you're doing the podcast. I think there's a need for it.
Oh, yeah. Thanks. Thank you. Any final thoughts about the money stuff? And then I've got one last question to go into.
I don't think so.
Yeah. Okay. So, Brenley, why don't you take a few minutes and just tell us about Humble Village and what you're doing there, and then kind of where people can find out more information if anyone's interested in contributing in any way. And all whatever information you provide, I'll also put in the show notes so people can look that up. But just fill us in a little bit about what that work is all about.
Okay, yeah, thanks for asking. So the Humble Village is an organization that works in the highlands of Guatemala, and Latin America is has the highest um, malnutrition rate in the world right now.
Hmm.
And I'm sorry, Guatemala within Latin America has the highest malnutrition rate right now. And this area of Guatemala where we're working up in the Alta Veta Pass is what it's called, is the highest malnutrition rate for Guatemala. So this is an area that's just in a lot of need. There are babies and children dying regularly
Hmm.
because of this malnutrition. And oftentimes it's, a mother who can't breastfeed a baby because she's malnourished. And so
Yeah.
that leads, it's just kind of a bad cycle, right? So the organization, we provide a lot of different things, and one of them is just to meet the kind of acute needs of helping these babies get back on track through formula, and also providing. It's kind of like an Ensure drink that gives the minerals and vitamins that these children need as they get older. So we work with mostly like 3 and under, and then also the mothers and getting them the nutrition that they need with and vitamins and things like that. But also a big part of it is just teaching them basic hygiene, also teaching them about nutrition and creating gardens so that they aren't just having to eat what they're used to, which is just corn. There's not a lot of education down there on eating healthy foods that have a lot of vitamins in them. So
Yeah.
we'll teach them about, needing protein and needing all these growing spinach in your garden and having eggs and, so that we have these centers that provide like kitchen demonstrations and also demonstration gardens
Cool.
where they can go and learn about that. Teaching them how to raise chickens and they can use the eggs and they can sell the extras that they have, things like that.
Yeah, sure.
So um, lots of different training that happens there. There's in-country employees. There's a group of us here that are working as strictly volunteers. We're not, nobody gets paid or anything, but in country there are these directors that oversee the projects and hire nurses and things to go out and meet with the families. And they have to speak the language because the language is Quechua, which is a dialect there in Alta Verapaz. And it's just a really beautiful work. You can do so much good with so little.
Yeah.
Um, so I feel really honored to be a part of it. I don't know if that answers your questions about what they do. Other things you would add, Spencer?
Just that it is amazing how little donations can go a long way. When we had our kids down there, one of the things they'll never forget is we hiked up to a family with 6 kids, and we went into their little home, and the family were selling because they had dinner that night, and it was a squirrel they'd caught
Wow.
on a spit that was roasting over just a log. Uh, and this organization, they're not going to change the entire world, but they'll do things like even help the the mother of the family. There's a lot of single mothers know how to build a fireplace where the smoke doesn't fill their hut, and it
Oh,
actually has a
sure.
chimney, and
Yeah.
where they can make a soup out of things that are going to feed their family. And it's so remarkable how blessed we are, and it's really fantastic to have an organization like Humble Village that that your money is going to the end, because you always wonder. I wonder as I'm donating. I think there's so many great causes, but there's a lot that have really high overhead, and you worry about that.
Sure.
And there's a lot there maybe satisfying immediate needs, and there's an education component of Humble Village too that's trying to break these generational problems of 14-year-old girls having babies that are malnourished, and then
Mm,
14 years later that malnourished baby's having another baby and
yeah.
no education, none of those things. And I do see that in a small way it's breaking that cycle.
Right.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's cool. That sounds like really good work. So if people are interested in contributing in some way, where should they go?
So the website is thehumblevillageproject.org. And so they can go there and learn more about the work and see pictures of these families that we're helping, and you can also donate there.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And thank you both so much for coming on the show and opening up and just sort of talking about your kids and your background and everything. So, and again, I think you're doing some really cool things. So, thank you.
Thanks, Dom.
Thanks for what you're
Great
doing.
to think about these things a little more deeply. So we appreciate you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the FI for Kids podcast. Please tell a few others about the show, and if you haven't already, please subscribe at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, our YouTube channel, or wherever you get your pods. If you have questions or comments, I'd love to hear from you. My email is dominic@fiforkids.com. That's DOMINIC at fiforkids, all one word, .com. You can also follow and connect on most social media platforms. Our intro music is courtesy of Douglas Cameron, and our exit music is provided by the Zoo Human Project, including our holiday theme tunes for the next few weeks. Please check out the musical friends of the pod at Spotify. Thanks again, and we'll talk next week.
City sidewalk.